Hi, I'm Ethan. I'm panning for the round. Good luck, everyone.
Hi, I'm Kavi. Best of luck for the round.
Go on. We should have two more judges.
Yuganesh, she, her pronouns address the panel as a whole. Congrats on making it to the Novice Finals.
Hi, I'm Ricky. Good luck for the round.
Wonderful. Teams, go ahead and introduce yourselves verbally as well. Preferred gender pronouns, of course, if you want to. If you don't, that's perfectly chill. I see Op has already. Gav, if you put your speaker order down in the chat as well, that'd be appreciated. Also, let us know which motion you vetoed and which motion we're debating. Yeah, Gav, introduce yourselves, please. Side government, team PotatoYamYam, do you all want to introduce yourselves? I'm just
Hello,
assuming
my name is Carlsson. I'm the Prime Minister and the reply speaker for side proposition today.
Hi, I'm Arilynn. I am the Deputy Prime Minister for today.
Hi.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, hi, Hanto, whip speaker here. No specific gender pronoun.
Wonderful. Op.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Ibrahim. You can call me Baem. No preferred gender pronouns. Everyone have a good final.
Hi. Hi, I'm Jamie. I go by she, her pronoun. Yeah. Have a good final.
Hi, I'm Aida, the op whip. Any pronouns. Good luck, everyone.
Wonderful. Correct me if I'm wrong, both teams vetoed motion B. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, then. And we're debating motion A, companies into underdeveloped regions. Yes? Just waiting on a confirmation from both Gov and Op, and we can get started. I'd really appreciate it if someone said something. Gov and Op, we're debating motion A. Yes?
Oh, yes.
Yes, correct.
Perfect. Thank you. Just a couple of things to make sure we have a smooth round. I don't know if anyone else on panel would oblige, but it's just a reasonable expectation that everyone times themselves all through the debate, not just for their own speeches. Of course, we'll be keeping time as well, but we might not be able to take care of timestamps. If any judge wants to put in timestamps, please be our guest. Second, if you have a distinct preference of taking POIs, apart from that, which is the default of the chat, just let someone know before your speech. Like, just mention it out before your speech. Cool. I think that's everything we need. Prime Minister, rock and roll.
Okay. For POIs, please be verbal. And I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is the duty of the state to provide. But when the state fails to provide, then we feel that it is absolutely fair that it turns to private people and the private sector to be able to develop regions within which it has failed to develop. One point of setup then. What does aggressively incentivizing mean? It means we give subsidies, we give tax cuts and tax restructuring programs to companies, all companies without exception, that want to move to regions which we classify as underdeveloped. This looks like Germany moving to East Germany, or how in many places around the world, areas outside of the capital city are incredibly underdeveloped, and thus those will be classified as underdeveloped regions. How is this different from just normal incentivizing? The two key ways. That A, we will increase the scale of our effort with this program with regards to things like how many subsidies we give and how much of a tax cut that we give to these companies. We give them to more companies, so we give them more tax cuts while we're doing it. But then B, we'll probably also ease companies operational logistically by allowing them easy access to these kinds of programs without providing much conditions or things like that. So, but lastly, just to note on setup that this kind of model will probably evolve over time. That is to say that some regions might develop and start becoming more developed than others, in which case we will deprioritize them and prioritize other regions who do become more undeveloped in the future. So it's not a static model. I just have one argument for you today, but I'm going to elaborate it well. And it's why we solve centralization. At the top of this argument, I want to frame what centralization is and why it is so bad for states. Centralization is basically when there is a drift in development between underdeveloped areas and developed areas of that country. And this happens for a few particular reasons in three aspects. That A, companies do not have an incentive to move or set up operations in underdeveloped areas because they feel like there might not be a consumer base there that they can sell to. That is to say, if they feel there is no demand within those areas because usually these areas have lower populations, for example, or maybe they have different palates and different tastes for the products that they're trying to sell, then they're not unlikely to move there, especially if they also have to build new things like offices and there's no infrastructure there. But then B, that often these places have less people in comparison to the capital cities or central areas of that country, because people generally flock to places where there's a job market or where there are other goods that they can access insofar as things like facilities, things like that. But the problem is that when companies try to centralize around one given area within a country, that means not only do citizens that are born within that region, in that developed region, tend to stay because they enjoy life as is, but also that people from outside that region tend to join in as well because they feel like they can pursue a better life in a place where there are more companies that can give them job opportunities and more facilities that can cater for the kind of lifestyle that they want to live. But that's C. In terms of infrastructure, opposition might say, well, you can't just build infrastructure within these areas. But we think that states also have some sign of calculus when it comes to what areas they put in infrastructure too. That's to say that states often make infrastructure if it means that there will be long-term development in the long run within the area that can then provide tax benefits for the state. The problem is that when there are no businesses there or very little business there, and there's very little job market, or there's very little people there that can pay taxes on buildings, for example, then the state is less likely to pour infrastructure within the area. And what they're likely to do is make the infrastructure within the central areas of their country better, because that gives them more tax, and that's far easier to pass through parliament and to make that into a policy. What this all culminates into is that oftentimes in many places around the world, organic movement simply doesn't happen, or happens at such a slow pace that other developed regions of that country would take a very, very long time to become developed under their side of the house. I don't think I have to explain why this is bad, but just a few impacts that you can put on top of your head. That obviously these regions have lower quality of life insofar there's less facilities, companies pay you less because there's less companies there, there's less competition, things like that. But also for these regions which are central to the state, they also experience an overpopulation problem insofar that a lot of people are going into those regions to capitalize on this job market, capitalize on the facilities that are there. This is the bad things such as pollution, such as crowdedness, these things which we want to mitigate under our side of the house. So how do we solve centralization? Firstly, we think that companies will want to move because although it's status quo, they technically have an incentive to move to these underdeveloped areas because they want to avoid saturation within centralized areas of the state. They are blocked by what? Risk of loss. And why is this true? Because companies inherently want to search for profit. And if there's no consumers there, then they're not going to move if they think that they're not going to turn a profit. Instead, what they will do is they will direct their resources to develop within that central area, maybe in marketing, maybe in the quality of their product, instead of branching out and expanding to other areas of the country. What do we do then under our side? We reduce the risk for them to move, right? Because at the point in which you make their operations cheaper within that new area, then they're likely to be able to do the accounting on that and realize maybe it would be worthwhile for us to expand to those those areas just so we can have wider reach as a business, and it wouldn't cost us too much to do so, and this can be a long-term investment for us. But crucially, we give these companies the safety and the comfort to move because we increase the margin of error for these companies. That is to say that they would need to fail so spectacularly to turn a loss under our side of the house that they would be willing to do it anyway. But that's B, at the point in which some companies will move to these locations, then they're also likely to incentivize other companies to move as well for the sake of competition, for the sake that there are now other companies that they need to compete with within that new region. They don't want to be left out of that race. This is important because, again, it's about profit, it's about expansion. We cater to those incentives under our side of the house. Secondly, then, people will move insofar that there are new companies within those areas that are set up shop there that can provide them a job market, that they also understand that even if they move out of the capital city, they're still going to land a pretty good job as a white-collar worker or a blue-collar worker, for example, and that their lives will not be jeopardized by the move that they are going to do. But then three, that we think that the state will then develop the area more, insofar that there is a larger job market, insofar there are companies to pay taxes, insofar there are people there that can pay taxes, then this means that the state's more incentivized to pour infrastructure in the area, and it's more justifiable for the state that way. But why does the state care about solving centralization? Because we think that inherently, the existence of a state is a social contract. That's to say that no matter where you are within the state, you pay tax to the government, right? And at the point at which the government is unable to provide you the basic necessities and facilities for you to live a good and comfortable life as you envision it, then it is the duty of the state to be able to use your tax money, in this case, to subsidize and incentivize these companies to move to your area so that you can then get the benefit, things like that. But moreover, we would say that the state cares because this would increase the tax revenue for them, and therefore this was a beneficial policy for them to do. Last thing I want to do in my argument, which is to trade off the idea of gentrification that's likely to come from opposition. We concede that probably to some extent there's going to be a large influx of people and companies to these areas, and that might impart some kind of shock. But we say that this is fine because then usually supply sort of adapts to demand. But moreover, we will argue that gentrification itself is good because if the people that are living there now get better facilities, can live better lives, they have access to things like education because the government is actually building infrastructure there, then we think gentrification is all well and good. We're happy to take that trade-off, and that's why you propose.
Wonderful. Thank you, Prime Minister. Leader Wop.
Hi, can everyone see and hear me clearly?
Yes, very much so.
All right. Give me a sec. Right. Sorry for the minor technical change. All right. Speech begins in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, no preamble. I'm not wasting any time. Going in straight to debate, this is how it's going to happen. Firstly, I'll give you a couple of rebuttals. 2, I give you key framing that was missing from PM's speech, and also 3, the first substantive from side opposition. All right, moving into the case, coming in from side government. What did they first tell you? Firstly, they gave us a bunch of assertions as to A, how individuals would end up, how these companies and how these companies will be placed in these areas in the first place. 2, the entire case runs on the presumption that the local community will just accept these people coming in to their area, changing the way of their life, so on and so forth, without giving any structural analysis as to why these things would come off. Secondly, when they talk about the trade-off, when they talk about gentrification, they accept it because it's in a form of development, because they don't mind. Their reasoning be it is that, oh, we have better schools, we have better access to things, therefore, like, gentrification is better. There is a huge hole and a huge problem with side's government case. How much do things in gentrified places cost? Things and cost of living and property prices in places that have been gentrified, that have been invaded by outside people, that have driven up prices. These are things that affect who? The most vulnerable stakeholder, which we are defending in this case, which is the people the poor people that live in these rural areas. So also, when it came to PM's characterization of what aggressive incentives look like, they were very shallow and narrow and not really over-encompassing of the purpose. All right, moving on to the part of a couple of reframings that needed. Aggressive incentivizing. Other than the tax write-offs and incentives that what was needed, what else is given to these companies? Because we're talking about aggressive incentivizing, not just incentivizing. This is very key to the debate. Aggressive incentivizing also looks like companies getting quick access to land and resources around the area. This is purely dependent on the government and the government's ability to incentivize certain companies to be able to transfer, to move, to get out of these places. These companies usually, what kind of companies get moved out, or what companies do these governments want to decentralize? These companies would end up firstly looking really big and corporate because they have the infrastructure and they generate the income. Two, these companies would obviously be prioritized by the government because these companies are huge tax contributors. So they end up being more prioritized by the government itself. Three, these are also the same kind of companies that usually try and cut corners to maximize profit, because at the end of the day, a company's goal, any business's goal, is to make profit, to maximize profits, to maximize shareholder values. And that's why it is of the utmost importance that we prevent things like exploitation and things from happening, which will be further elaborated on. But thirdly, a third piece of framing, which is completely missed out from side government, is that who are the people that are going to be most affected about? So the people that are going to be affected are the people that are living in these underdeveloped regions. So when we talk about rural people, right, and rural areas, what do rural people usually look like? Rural people looks like, people that live in slightly less flashy houses, for example, or people that, don't earn as much because of the wage disparity and the minimum wage in a set particular area. These people are also usually more conservative leaning, and they hold very tightly to their culture and their politics. Hence, these kind of people are the worst kind of people that you want to introduce large-scale forms of change. Maybe in the short term, because government might tell us that, these people can slowly adapt to it. They would be able to slowly adapt to it if the things weren't aggressively pushed. But the point now is that in this debate, these things are aggressively pushed, so these people already are less likely to participate in this form of change. This itself should already take down side government's case. All right, moving on to the substantives coming from side government. We pivot to you that the reason why we don't want to do so is because we want to protect these people in these local areas. Three prongs to this argument. Firstly, the potential of exploitation of low wages. Firstly, let's say you put up a factory in a rural area to quote unquote increase job markets, who would be the people that would most likely sign up for these jobs? The locals. But let's consider this factor for a lot of people. A lot of rural places can't fill up a factory. Why? One, they might lack the skills. Two, they don't want the job. So these companies still wanting to run, where would they turn to? They would turn to other forms of labor. They take people that would accept lower wages. They would take foreign people that would accept these lower wages because they need a certain form of payment. This is how we protect people on the first hand. Second, on the cost of gentrification. So as I explained earlier, when a company moves in, there is a shift. When people move from a local economy that is, for example, mostly like an economy of like fishermen, or a company, or like the local economy is mostly circling around farmers markets, for example. These are things that are severely affected. Why so? Because of the principles of cost and demand. So because of cost and demand, when you have more flashier things around, these things have higher value. And when things have higher value, people want to compete in the market. This leads to things like rising cost of living around people. But also because let's take for example a huge company like, let's say, Tesla opens like in the rural places of Canada and in Saskatchewan or whatever. This leads to the rise of property value, which leads me into my third point. No, thank you. To my third point, when we talk about how the land and the environment ends up getting further exploited, because these incentives by government are kind of given up a little bit fast, because the government wants them to shift out. Let's get a fast rough timeline, or let's say like a year, for example. Like there wouldn't be enough levels of like ability for people to actually understand the complexities of the land and what the implications are of having, let's say, a factory around. Like it might not cause like air pollution, but it might pollute the river and so on and so forth. So these are things that are natural resources that either even if our government will say that it's not exploited, but it's also likely to happen when you have multiple factories in a set area. All right, so what are the impacts of this argument? Firstly, we talked about how people have already been exploited. On their side, it looks worse. On our side, yeah, even though it's not as developed, we rather not have these people exploited because they have their own economy going. Two, a rise in property value and cost of living. This is very detrimental to the locals that live there, because the outsiders that would come and migrate and work in these places, like side government is telling you, these people would be somewhat set in their life because to achieve such positions. But for the locals, they don't have this ability to jump up. And lastly, on the impact of, we can see that this land, when the government prioritizes like this, it's a discriminating distribution of land. It drives up property value and it pressures more people in the locals to sell, because at this point they are poor. They need this money And yeah, they might not be as desperate. However, to a poor person, when they see a certain number of sum, there is such a thing as not being able to say no to these kind of things. So all this being weighed against the case from side government, we have clearly shown to you that on our side of the house, we are able to protect the most vulnerable stakeholder in this debate and not just prioritize all the capitalists like what the side government does. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leader Wop, TPM. Also, before we proceed, just a reminder to ask and accept POIs, big part of debating.
POIs, please just unmute yourself. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, notice that when leader of opposition speech is just mostly we're playing on our worst case scenario, that's how you know that the opposition side has no real solution towards the real problem that we have already posited towards you from the Prime Minister. Listen here then, Judge. We cannot guarantee that things are going to be lovely all of the time, that development is always going to be equitable, that is always going to be the best thing ever. We tell you that this is already a trade-off that's implicit in the PM speech. We are willing to at least bite some of the bullets that this development can bring, as long as in the long term and in the long run, we can ensure sustainability and we can ensure that the economic development is truly equitable towards all the countries, and we close the disparity between areas. Okay, some of the clashes here then. The very first thing that the leader opposition highlights is how it's going to impact the citizens of the underdeveloped things. 3 points under this. They tell you that the local citizens are not going to accept these companies. This is a very weird premise. They characterize these rural areas as being really stupid and very true to their ideas, to the point that they are so allergic to the fact that change might happen to their side of the house. To their area, but this is very highly unlikely. Why? Because even the most conservative of people understands that when their citizens and when their people are suffering due to lack of infrastructure, that they cannot even get clean water, that they are suffering that because they cannot get money because there's no jobs available in that area, it is enough for you to cave in and to accept this economic development in the first place. Secondly, even if that was the case, we tell you that it's a very vanishing minority in this debate, because most of the cases in real life does not even play out that way. They specifically cherry pick the very worst case scenario on our side. We tell you that in the most cases, most cities aren't really that starkly different. Because notice the difference in the motion, yeah. Germany and East Germany, it's not like this East Germany is a really super nationalist or like super closed off area. It's not to the point that they're isolationist either. The opposition still has to engage with our case on this. Yeah.
How can you say they are not starkly different when capital cities and regional cities have such different geography and topology that impacts what kind of economies exist in those areas?
I've already rebutted that in my first 2 minutes anyway. So secondly, we already tell you that they're trying to say that local citizens are not going to pay a job into the job market because there's no skills and that they don't want it. I've already proved to you why they still want it. It's money. At the end of the day, people are gonna cave. It's development. And secondly, just because they don't have skills doesn't mean that these companies will not hire them. Because as we deposit to you from the Prime Minister, when these companies move to these areas, whether they like it or not, they will still have to hire employees. And is that, yes, exactly, when the local people are the only ones applying, then the companies have no choice but to hire them. Furthermore, companies have incentive to hire these local people because the wages are even more affordable under our side of the house. So companies are more likely to give this job market in the first place. Secondly, even if there is lower wages on our side of the house, we posit to you that lower wages are better than no wages. Remember, counterfactual on their side of the house, highly unengaged. We have already proven to you that on their side of the house, when the centralization happens, which impacts both of the companies and both of the citizens, when the infrastructure is so bad to the point that if we want to play with their logic that is going to be super isolationist, these people are going to find escape, which is urbanization. They go to the city and they try to find a better job. But we tell you, because there's overcrowdedness in this centralized city, overdevelopment that is very oversaturated, these people are not going to be able to find a better life in the city. Therefore, what? They don't have job. They at the worst case scenario, they might turn to a life of crime. Opposition cannot accuse us of saying that our policy is bad while they provide no remedy whatsoever. We tell you that decentralization is extremely harmful because it creates a power gap and disparity between areas where a capital city has much more economic power and political power, where all the facilities are centralized into this city and not even being distributed to the others. This is why we tell you that this aggressive incentive needs to happen, because the government, there's only so much the government can do. It is time for us to, take the first step advantage to move to these areas and open up this and to incentivize the demand for the supply to run. This is how, if this doesn't happen on their side of the house, the underdeveloped areas are gonna forever stay underdeveloped areas. Responsibility goes to waste. Second clash on how is good on the companies and the aggressive incentive. We tell you that organic movement is impossible, and if so, on a very minor case. This is why we tell you that this aggressive incentive is very likely to happen. They try to accuse us by saying that, oh, aggressive incentive gives people this land, but we tell you there's regulations. It's not like we are evicting these people away from their land, okay? These companies move, even though they have aggressive incentive, there's still laws, there is still, morality, and people are still very will be more likely to be resistant towards this very blatant exploitation anyway. And we tell you that it doesn't even matter. Yes, exactly, because companies want to maximize profit and exploitation. All of the harms that they posit to us, saying that there's going to be a rise in property value, saying that there's going to be gentrification, is completely wrong. Because these companies realize that to get the consumer base in these underdeveloped areas is to make the prices cheaper. This is when the harms under their side of the house cannot run. Because these companies want to make sure that at least some people can buy, they will adjust their facilities to be suitable to the needs of these underdeveloped people's to the underdeveloped people. We tell you that gentrification is not always a bad thing. It can actually be a good thing, especially for these underdeveloped areas. Just because they're underdeveloped doesn't mean they're not unqualified, doesn't mean that they're forever isolationists, and doesn't mean that they don't want change at all. If anything, we further posit to you that it's far more likely that these underdeveloped areas are going to want development, are going to want change. For example, Indonesia, all of the development and all of the changes only happen and centralized in the capital city, which is Jakarta. And then this has already raised a lot of awareness and raised a lot of discourse where the development should be should be equitable, which all cities demand equitable development. This point coming in from the opposition side cannot fly at all, because we tell you that because the state is responsible for making the citizens happy, because we want to give a proper life of dignity for these underdeveloped people, we win.
Wonderful. Thank you, DPM. Hello.
Hi, am I audible? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, DLO, we can hear you just fine. Sorry about the delay in unmuting.
Oh, okay, no worries, no worries. I prefer to go with verbal POI, and just feel free to raise your concerns anytime. Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, now today, before I start my speech, I would like to present my rebuttals first. Now here, side government here is painting a world where the rapid industrialization equals to a country equals to a place suddenly becoming developed because of a new corporation or corporations coming in due to the subsidy given by the government. So now I'd like to clarify here that Thai government here has failed to actually clarify this on how the trade-off of in the long term the aggressive incentivizing, which low-key equals to rapid industrialization, actually ensures a long-term possibility, which is actually ensuring sustainability. They have lacked to explain this to you, and I, as the second DLO, will actually explain you to this. Now, firstly, going on to my points. We would like to highlight on social distortion and cultural disruption. So when these companies come into these underdeveloped areas where they have their own culture, like giving you an example of fishmonger village, they have their own culture, they have their own businesses, they have their own small community. Okay, so when these corporations come in, whether it's companies, small companies, big companies, when these companies come in, they increase the new population of the area. So now, why is it harmful? So when these corporations come in, they definitely, as what government mentions, they want to cut the cost. Okay, yes, they want to cut the cost. So when these corporations, when they want to cut the cost, they are, quote unquote, government here is trying to paint the picture that they are more likely to hire the local people because the companies are incentivized to, but they are not forced to. They are just encouraged to hire these people. But whether these companies are likely to hire these or not, or these local citizens or not, is not highlighted. Well, side opposition here, I'm trying to propose to you that these companies are not likely to actually hire these locals because the locals have the autonomy of being hired. And even despite side government mentioning that they would likely to work for these companies because they have quote unquote money, but sometimes money doesn't really equal to what they deserve to be paid for. Like, the job scopes of working in a factory and being a fishmonger are totally different things, totally different cultures, totally different communities. They have different types. So it is not likely for them to adapt to this sudden change because it is a aggressive insensitizing. That means the government wants to directly start this thing. It is not a slow and long-term issue. So now, as I highlighted, as locals are currently working beforehand, before this sudden rapid industrialization, they have their own culture, they have their own economy, their own businesses. They're like fishing towns, paddy fields, or farms in general. That's why they're underdeveloped. So these corporates are more likely to actually hire foreign workers because the local people are still going to work. They aren't going to suddenly ditch their jobs for quote unquote more money. They have suppliers to answer to, they have consumers to answer to, they have businesses to run. So this will actually clash with the culture of the locals because they are already local people living there. Then the sudden influx of these foreign workers will actually harm the people because these workers are needed here to firstly come and run the company. So I mean, since it's an underdeveloped region, the rent is going to be cheap. The company is going to cut costs so they can hire huge amounts of people because they want to make money. They want to make it fast, kan? So now, since these corporates are like to hire those people, it will actually influx the people and increase to social tension. So this social tension between the citizens and the foreign workers will actually clash because their cultures are totally
PI?
different. Yes, PI accepted.
Sure, doesn't matter.
You're
If
right.
you're forever gonna posit that harm, then underdeveloped areas are going to be forever underdeveloped.
Yes, thank you so much for the POI. I would just like to highlight that we're not dismissing the fact that you can industrialize a place. It's just that we don't want to do it at the extent of rapid industrialization. So now let me tell you, panel, why is rapid industrialization a harm despite the insensitizing, despite quote unquote government mentioning the taxpayers paying money? Government here is working on an assumption that everybody will pay. Everybody will go according to their plan. They're living in a world where ponies and rainbows fly. Okay, so now let me tell you as side opposition that on our end, this is not likely to happen because these regions will definitely develop eventually, but not at the expense of their own social economy, of their own culture, of their own environment. So on our side, our local community is protected by the harms of this rapid industrialization because they get to keep their own culture, they get to keep their own businesses. They don't need to suffer from the sudden impacts of losing all of these. On side of government, yes, the underdeveloped regions have these sudden big corporations, but it does not mean that the sudden economy will suddenly boost. It's a long-term slow progress, which this actually brings more harm than good. So first, next point, sustainability. Now, government has bring the trade-off sustainability, but they like to actually highlight how is it sustainable in the long run. Let me tell you, in this case, it is not sustainable because even if these corporations are located outside, the products actually don't cycle within a region itself. So let me give you an example. These corporations who can afford to relocate themselves to these underdeveloped regions, which need a mass amount of workers or can hire these people, are probably big corporations like Tesla. So if let's say your target market is like the rich people, relocating yourself to an underdeveloped country or region where there is not your target market will actually harm the company more than good. So these companies are technically not likely to go there because corporations want to earn money. So it doesn't make sense that a corporation would like to relocate themselves to a rural area where their target audience or their target market is unable to purchase directly from them. So now displacement. So when these companies want to industrialize or build a new factory, they're only going to need a big space, new roads, new infrastructure, new places for them to stay. So the incentive by quote unquote paying a cheaper price or providing the local citizen is at a bare minimum compensation. Why? Okay, let's say this fishmonger village, this big corporation wants to come and build a big factory. So they're going to ask people to evacuate because the government is allowing this. So they're definitely going to make space for these corporations to build their land, to build their stuff. So these corporations are going to go in and giving the locals a quote unquote price, but they're going to give it at a bare minimum because why not save costs? And then this leads to a loss of the local industries and businesses. So as local factories and construction companies will likely replace all these local cultures and businesses, this will actually disencourage locals to thrive because since they're vastly replaced by large amounts of new infrastructure, new workers, and it will actually be insanely harmful to community and the cultural identity. So rapid industrialization actually leads to the expense of the public health of the underdeveloped regions of the country. So why is this likely to happen? Because the rapid industrialization of encouraging this development of these massive corporations leads towards the lack of the government's ability to environmentally contagious or hold these companies accountable. Because since they are now aggressively pushing this initiative, these companies will definitely jump into the bandwagon. They'll definitely find an underdeveloped area to save costs to ensure that they will have their company written there because they're getting more beneficial gain. But in this sense, I'll paint you a picture. So if this factory is going to build in this place, then the government says, okay, just go without doing any thorough checks because they're aggressively pushing it. They're rapidly industrializing. They're not doing much checks. They're not doing much checking to the harm of the environment. This factory can put whatever pollution they want into the local area, and then these people won't be held accountable because of the sudden realization of the sudden industrialization. And with that, I've never been bothered to oppose.
Wonderful. Thank you, DLO. Govwith. Govwith.
Here. Sorry. Hello, I'm here. Okay. Taking my POI through chat. Sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. On the top of my speech, I'm going to first do 3 call outs before I continue with the class and the substantive materials that have been brought all along by all speakers. So the first thing that I'd like to call out is just by looking at what they're doing in their speech, because insofar that the speech concerned, there hasn't been any counterfactual to explain why then the comparative on their world is likely or marginally gonna be better. That is to say, any burden that they try to push, things like pollution, things like, for example, gentrifications and whatnot, will presumably still happen in their world insofar that they are unable to tell you why then the comparisons therefore better to stay centralized as opposed to just diversify the asset. Second of all, we would like to argue that centralization is something that we have already characterized and invested a lot of time in telling you why this is so harmful. We literally tell you that means a lot of people in rural areas are unable to literally go to the city all the time insofar that they don't have the money. That means that a lot of people in rural area will always be uneducated, unprivileged all the time. But also that means that pollutions will continuously and rapidly happen in that central area. That means the people in that central area will be more polluted and will be more harmed in terms of their health rates. But third of all, we also argue that properties are going to be so expensive, but considering the fact that that's the only central economy where it is saturated and monitored, that means that all the time, if people want to go into the central area, they need to bring a very high capital. The threshold is going to be so big in order for company to start being more relevant and able to enter into the market and get into the economy. I think that all of these reasons which already posed to you were unresponded by anything on the first and second op. I think it's uncharitable if the third op want to start engaging in that. Having said that, 5 things in this page. First, let's engage on the class on the local area that they are talking about. They argue that local people are unable to accept you as a company if you come into the land. To respond, it's predicated that in this local area, the local people are already ever disadvantaged by these corporations. And I don't think that this is a very charitable characterization that any oppositions want to run, so strip that off. But second of all, we argue on comparative that this is unlikely, and more local people will likely want to welcome you for 2 reasons. Number one, because there will be more development. It means that in current status quo, development doesn't really happen for the reasons that because government has not had the incentive to eventually develop those areas yet, as they haven't seen the incentive for the long-term benefit. We think that on our world, when we incentivize these corporations to start moving and having a lot of corporations to build their areas there, but not only corporations, F&B industry, service industry, they are entering there. What are the marginal benefit? The marginal benefit is that we start seeing corporations that building there will need infrastructure, will need like street to be more organized so that their distributions of the products and also things can be handled better. We think that the incentive of government, therefore, to also develop that will be much better. There's a trickle-down effect then, because now society can enjoy much more smoother road, street, and area for passing. That means also light and electricity that will be built there. There are more benefits that we can get for the people, even if that means we have to start by having more corporations. The marginal benefit is just clearer on our side. Oppositions doesn't have it. Second, on the labor, what they argue is that, it's going to be bad because labor now are going to be paid cheap, or worse, they are not going to be paid at all because corporations don't want that. No, untrue. 3 things. 1, let's talk about the corporations that is cheap. I think that the marginal benefit that we can have here is that at the very least, we have more blue-collar workers that are working there in comparison to in this area where people are not even working at all, meaning that people will have less incentive to believe that there is sort of development to happen. And I think that this is something which is bad, because most often than not, this is the reasons why a lot of people in rural area do not want their children to pursue higher education and just stop at a certain level of education and start working. We think that the cycle of economic poverty will continuously happen on your world, while on our world it is different. In our world, we have more blue-collar workers that work hard, and now seeing that development is a progressive thing that can possibly happen, more incentive for their children to therefore get into education and work in the future and into much better education and whatnot. I think it's much better under our world. But second of all, we think that development means that we think that labor in our world is also much more favorited. Why? Because labor in our world is something that is much cheaper, right? Because this is starting developed area in comparison to centralized area where the regional wages is already very high, and therefore company have to pay very high for just a menial job, for example. The comparative that in our world now, you can pay similar work but with a much cheaper, because the cost of living in that particular area is still marginally smaller, and therefore it's much more efficient to have that. But third of all, they want to talk about the evictions of the people. Why we I'm going to talk first about the natural resource exploitation. Why we don't think that has happened? I think this is a suicide mission coming from OP to argue this. Look, the motion say underdeveloped region. It means that resources on OP is worse because it's never touched and it's never used. We think it is such a waste. The comparison on our world is that we at least use these resources, and now the trickle-down effect goes either to the federal state's reserve in terms of tax money that is given to the state, or it also trickles down in terms of CSR that is contributed to the local people. Even if that means these local people are unable to directly access into this product, we think this is something that is marginally better. Fourth of all, the evictions of the people that will happen. I don't think that it will happen for the reasons that we say that they will pander to the local demand too. Because here, look at the characterization. The kind of corporations that will enter into this state, into this area, are not always corporations that working in terms of industrial alone, right? They are also service company. They are also F&B industry. This kind of industry rely on local market. to continuously able to use their product, it means that more likely they also do not want to hurt the sympathy or the feeling of this individual. They are more likely want to cooperate with them in order to maintain their relevance. But even if we say that corporation is that evil, we think that that is the state ability to capture the interest of by making sure that these corporations still provide CSR, and therefore continual development of the rural area will still happen regardless whether or not corporations care or not about it. But at least we will always have this accountable because we have it. Lastly, on property, I just think that when they are the first persons to enter into this rural area, I don't necessarily think that property is such a significant debate because they at least already have house to begin with. We propose.
Thank you, GovWhip. OpWhip.
Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, OpWhip.
1 second. Panel. Private companies are simply not the best actor to provide, much less provide sustainably. Okay, that is our stance on site opposition. And it's very easily proven looking at status quo, which we are trying to maintain, where companies like Microsoft and Intel and Porsche, they open factories in not just nations, but also regions in the same nation where they are able to buy cheaper land, exploit lower wage expectations, etc. Right? So what is our stance on site op? Our stance is that alleviating regional disparity is beneficial. We admit that decentralizing industrialization away from capital cities is beneficial, but rapid aggressive industrialization poses extremely harmful impacts that we have told you about, and SiteGov never provided the tipping point for which justifies this aggression, right? So the burden on site opposition in our side of the house is simple: to prove that sustainable and inclusive development is a much, much preferable world than rapid development, right? So what have site government brought in today's debate? They have brought the argument for decentralization of development. They gave us a shopping list of why decentralization is important and good and why oversaturation in capital cities is bad, right? The thing is, it is essential to understand that decentralization for a balanced regional development is a goal on both sides of the house. But it is SiteGov's burden to prove how aggressive incentivization is not the ideal approach to achieve it, right? But what have we told you on site op? We've explained how, in an effort to quickly develop in underdeveloped regions, governments may undertake large-scale infrastructure projects in a very short timeline, such as roads and airports and industrial parks. So these projects and the rate with which they sprout causes worse environmental damage, because there is less likely time and resources allocated to plan and build contingencies in town planning to mitigate things like floods and displacement of wildlife. Because those kinds of contingency plans in and of itself are huge undertakings and projects that the government is not incentivized to do. No, thank you. Two simple examples. One, in Malaysia, the development of the East Coast to build the semiconductor industry, because now that is our main export, right, in Malaysia. So that rapid industrialization did not take into account displacing large populations of wildlife like monkeys. So now we have human-monkey conflicts in those rural areas that rapidly developed in Malaysia and also in Thailand, right? Second example, Nusantara, which has been declared to be Indonesia's new capital. But that decision was made, that shift was incentivized before they even thought of one of Indonesia's biggest problems, which is waste management. So they incentivized it before thinking about a smart waste management system. And what happens today? 20 million tons of waste produced in Indonesia. How many is produced in Nusantara and currently is in Nusantara and regions around it? 20 to 30%. Do you know how much that is? So you can see how on our side of the house, we agree that balanced regional development is good and we want it. We're saying the rate and aggression with which you're doing it means that you are doing it at the cost of sustainability, because they are more incentivized to attract companies there, and they don't have the incentive to spend 5, 6, 10 years in order to do contingency plans, right? So next, let's talk about how side government claim that they can guarantee social development. More people will be empowered in rural areas with better jobs, pay more taxes. This benefit is highly presumptuous and not based in reality at all. Here's the structural reasons why the benefit is not guaranteed. 1. Aggressive incentivization may not necessarily lead to equitable distribution amongst local residents. How and why? I will tell you. Rural folk lack the necessary skills or qualifications for new jobs created. It limits their ability to take advantage of these opportunities. Why? What are the natures of the companies that are shifting? Tech, manufacturing, right? So the type of jobs created may not align with the skill sets and interests of local job seekers. It leads to they cannot fulfill those job opportunities without sufficient training, education, etc. These new jobs that you claim exist will not provide opportunities for them, right? So what does the world look like in our world in South opposition? The sustainable development that we want looks like this, like targeted skill development, for example, like engaging with local communities in planning and implementing the development projects to ensure that their needs and concerns are addressed, and to promote a sense of ownership over their livelihoods, a sense of ownership over their communities. And opportunities for this kind of sustainable development doesn't exist inside Gov's paradigm because it is challenging to achieve, because these companies and government are not incentivized to do it in the short time frame, because they focus on short-term economic gain, and it is simply because of the rushed nature of aggressive development. So on that count, we consider that we have the better benefit, right? So next, let's talk about wages. On-site government, they agree that these companies open shop in these rural areas because they can pay lower wages, and they bite the bullet and say their entire stance is that lower wages is better than no wages. Okay, I'll tell you why this is so harmful and so elitist on side government side, right? The assumption that rural folk have no wages blatantly ignores the diversity of rural economies, and it dismisses the value of traditional livelihoods. If you displace local industries and impose this meritocratic mindset that assumes working for a name brand company is better, so this assumption leads to several negative consequences, right? 1, rural communities often rely on farming, animal breeding, local industries, right? So ignoring these sources of income and displacing them in favor of wage labor for neighboring companies is a harming and colonialist mindset. So what is the impact of this mindset, right? This is so important. It causes increased economic vulnerability, where rural economies that become overly dependent on your wage labor can be more vulnerable to economic shock and fluctuation. What have we seen? When have we seen this before? As my dealer have mentioned, during the pandemic, when modern companies had to close down, mass layoffs, but in rural areas, our economies were still active. People still traded crops and produce, because diversified rural economies, development that is sustainable, that includes traditional industries, provides a buffer against economic instability. So in our world, we curb exploitation of rural folk to pay them less than workers in cities are paid for. We encourage earning wage via local industries. At the same time, on side up, we embrace its industrialization, but in a sustainable pace. So let's weigh. Our stakeholders are rural folk, the most vulnerable group. Their stakeholder is companies, so we think that our stakeholders are more important. Second way, principles. Their principle, development period, with little to no care for negative impacts, but on side out, we believe that, hey, if you want to develop a place, it has to be sustainable, it has to be inclusive. And with that, I've never been prouder to oppose this motion. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Op reply.
Yeah, what was point number 2 and point number 3 from that?
The one is decentralization.
Yeah, you didn't mute yourself again.
Oh shit, sorry.
Yeah, y'all aren't quite muted, so we can hear y'all. But yeah, op reply whenever you're ready.
All right, hi. I would like to confirm that I am both audible and visible.
All good. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Apologies for the technical misstep. This is like the 3rd time it happened. I guess it's the last round.
It's fine. It's fine.
All right.
I mean, although if it's the 3rd time that's happening, maybe there's.
All right. Okay. Let's just wrap this all up so we can all go take a nap. All right. speech begins in 3, 2, 1. Don't tell lies about me, and I won't tell truths about you. But today in this debate, I need to tell you exactly why side opposition has lost, side government has lost this debate, and why the win goes to side opposition. Ladies and gentlemen, looking at first, who are we protecting at first? At face value, side opposition pivots from the start that we care about the most vulnerable individual, the individual that has the least likelihood to be able to save themselves, and the most likely person that will be suffering the most, which is the poorer people. On-side government, they prioritize. Their priority is simply development and these corporations and catering to them to ensure that they have a better plot. On face value itself, you can already see who is defending the smaller person and who has a greater impact in today's debate. But let's move on to argumentation. What did side government tell you? Side government ranted to us about the issues of centralization. Firstly, they talked about how decentralizing these issues would solve everything. And thirdly, they talk about how social dynamics will be fine. Going from bottom to top, when we talk about social dynamics, on our side of the house, we've already explained to you the complexities, the complex nuances of these rural areas, the customs and traditions which they follow, the economies which which allow these communities to continue to grow and live. These are things that will be disrupted when you have things coming aggressively. Side government has this deluded version of the world where the motion is missing the word aggressively. Because if we are arguing on the fact that yes, it's a problem when you push these things aggressively. We are not opposed to development in these like this. At no point in any of our speeches did we go against the concept of development. We've only gone against the concept of aggressively pushing for this kind of development for all the damage that have been popped up. So that's first and foremost. On the idea of centralization and decentralization, the reasoning behind all these points that were given from side government look like a couple of things. Firstly, they look very presumptuous in the sense that they think that companies would just willy-nilly move out of the city. Two, they also believe that people in these areas would just simply accept these people in their new area, disrupting their livelihood, their social economic structure, their culture. These are things that are going to be challenged, because what the important framing that was given by side opposition when we talked about how these people are. This is important for the debate because it shows you how these people would react. So because all of side government's argumentations are contingent on the fact that these programs succeed in the first place. And for them to succeed, you need to ensure some form of social stability because you are implanting something into this area. What has side opposition done to answer this question? We've shown to you how these people would most likely not accept these kind of things because at the rate it's going, the pace is too fast, but also B, of the nature of these people themselves. These people being most likely right-wing, very conservative, not dumb, and not dumb, no job, no money, like what side government was trying to propose. These people just earn a little bit less because for the majority of the time they operate within their own systems. So side government's case is highly contingent on the fact that these people in these rural areas were able to accept it without giving us any level of analysis as to why exactly these rural areas are the ideal location other than the fact that empty land. On our side, we've proven to you that these people would be disrupted, but also B, the land itself. And why is it important? Not just its resources, but it's also its infrastructure, its topography, its geography, how it can be key for certain people to travel from here and there. Certain things can be disrupted and will be disrupted in the name of development if you push for these things too fast, if you neglect the time it needs to actually plan these things out. These are all things that side opposition has cared about. These are all things that we have pivoted to you. And this is why we've shown you that we care for the most vulnerable stakeholder and why we should finally be novice finals after the third attempt to. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ob reply. Gab reply.
Okay. It's a fun reply. Yeah, I'll just start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it might be indicative of a good policy if Germany implements it. But regardless, there's 3 clashes in my speech. Firstly, is centralization a problem? Secondly, will companies move? And 3, will exploitation happen? Firstly, on centralization, we devoted a seriously staggering amount of time telling you that centralization is not only bad, it is also self-reinforcing and also doesn't get solved over time. We told you that it's bad for the people within that local region because they don't have access to facilities, they don't have access to higher wages, they can't live the life they want to live. It's also bad for people within mega cities because it's overcrowded, it's overpolluted, there's too much competition, there's saturation, all of these things. That proved that organic movement itself, which is presumably what opposition is going for, is not going to be enough within the time frame that we have allotted this debate. The only semblance of a response that they have to this central core issue within the debate was in DLO when they said, it's okay, we can all be fishmongers. That kind of misses the point, right? Because at the point in which you are a fishmonger, then you also probably want a better life. This came from my P2, by the way, and it was sort of unresponded with all three speakers. So the point is not that we are affecting people or forcing people to change their lifestyle, but moreover that we are affording people the choice to be able to change their lifestyle and give them higher wages. I think the way here is just on analysis that this is a huge problem. This causes pollution, this causes overcrowding, and that insofar that they weren't able to prove to you why this was a problem they could just shirk off and solve on their side somehow, then they couldn't win this debate. This is very, very important because whatever impacts you talk about exploitation, about environmental damage doesn't really matter, especially if you're trying to put these citizens first. Secondly, then, will companies move? We said two things, incentives for these companies to move. Firstly, that it reduces the financial risk of moving to shift their decision-making calculus. So this means that they might have more profit because their operational costs are cheaper because of subsidies or because of tax cuts, for example. But the secondly, since more companies are going to be there, other companies are going to be incentivized to move there as well because they want to compete with those companies. They don't want to lose out in the expansion game. They said basically the broad premise they used to rebut this was to say that, well, people in those areas don't really have skills to work within that factory. First off, I will note that this is quite tense insofar that they're also talking about how those local people's lifestyles will be shaken up. So if they can't work there, then are their lifestyles shaken up? I'm not quite sure. But also this is in the same breath that they talk about factories. And I'm not sure what kind of soft skills you might need to work in factories. Educate me if I'm wrong. But also that's our model. The point is that you bring the companies to these areas, which incentivizes things like CSR, which incentivizes things like infrastructure, to promote education, to get these people to learn how to work in those jobs and to get more skilled people from the city, for example, to move to those areas and help out with that sort of process. The way here is on the time scale that sure, even if we take the very, very best case of opposition, it might have some organic movement. It is far, far too slow. Meanwhile, we can get that kind of improvement much quicker with the stimuli that the government will give, and which regardless development will need to happen anyway. Now, thirdly, on exploitation, this was their biggest claim. Their basic premise to say was that you grant unchecked power to the company at the point in which you're aggressively incentivizing them. But the thing is, aggressively incentivizing is not the same as allowing companies to do whatever the hell they want within that new area. My P2 already told you that labor laws exist, and therefore you still have things like minimum wage. You have to treat your workers fine if you want to actually set up shop with that company. I don't think we live in post-industrial revolution where every factory was horrible to work in. But also I think this is horribly uncomparative from their side because no, they don't actually analyze why companies wouldn't exploit things under their side of the house, considering that then the most powerful companies will move to those places because they need capital. And then after this, they just machine gun impacts and saying environment, labor. My whip has rebutted every single one of these individually, telling you what is not within the incentive of the companies to be able to exploit the natural resources, to exploit the people there, because they also need the goodwill of the people if they want to set up shop there and make a consumer base there, which was also analysis that came out in P1, but I guess they didn't get it. So the way here is on scale of impact, that even if some exploitation happens, that's a constant of capitalism. At least under our side of the house, we get more development, we get people to actually able to live the lives that they want to live. That's why we win on the first try.
Thank you, Gov reply. Thank you for both teams for this rather interesting and quite entertaining debate. As I'm sure everyone's aware, results of this round is going to happen at the closing ceremony, post which you can approach any of us for feedback and of course more words on this. But yeah, cheers. Thank you so much for the round. If everyone could give us the room, we'll submit our ballots and deliberate. Thank you.